Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's webinar. I'll give us a couple minutes here, a couple seconds for others to join. You're on with an amazing discussion that we're excited for. We also have had a record number of questions that were submitted ahead of time, so I'm excited to jump into that during our discussion portion today. Again, thank you so much for joining our webinar today. And if you have any questions that you didn't submit, please make sure that you do that in the chat. We'll try to get to as many of those as we possibly can at the end of the event. So once again, thank you so much for joining today's webinar. I'm Ken Tracy. I'm our Chief Client Officer here at Campaign HQ. I just celebrated my 9 years with the company, so that has been an exciting milestone for me. Next, I'll kick it off over to Nicole, who will introduce herself as well as a little bit of background about CHQ.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Ken. Thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Nicole Schlinger. I'm the president and founder of Campaign HQ, and we help campaigns, consultants, and issue organizations win their elections and win public affairs campaigns using the phone. So we'll do live calls, automated calls, text messages, telephone, town halls, all the ways that you can miss people who fall through the cracks with all of the many forms of voter contact that we do to reach out to people. We're here to plug those cracks and essentially make sure that that the people who need to hear from us, that we can ID them, persuade them, and turn them out, which is even more important in off-year elections where turnout is expected to be lower than they would be in an even-numbered year general election, especially the record presidential election we just came off of. So what happens in New Jersey and Virginia this year is really going to be a bellwether for what we expect to come next. And so whether you're working on races in New Jersey and Virginia, or you're working on some of the many municipal elections we've got going on right now, what happens now is a bellwether for what happens next year. And so no matter where you're joining us from, we're really glad you're here and looking forward to answering some of the questions. We've got two people who've been my friends for a long time and are really experts in these two bellwether states. So we've got Jimmy Keady from JLK Political and Phil Valenziano from Cold Spark. So I'm not sure if we've got an order to go in, so I'll just turn it over to Jimmy to introduce himself.
Hey, well, thanks for being on. And Nicole, thank you for this opportunity to speak with everybody today. So I'm Jimmy Keady. I run JLK Political Strategies. I'm also a partner in Point One, which is a mail firm. So we are based in Richmond, Virginia. So I'm excited to kind of be on today because we definitely understand off-year elections and how to win really deep blue seats. We currently are in over 12 states with representatives on the state house, on both the House and the Senate, and help with various caucuses. So we're a general consulting firm. We are kind of a one-stop shop for your local races and your state races. And a little bit about me: I've been in politics for over a decade. Started in the Greg Abbott campaign in 2013 and walked my way through a couple NRCC targeted races, chief of staff for former member of Congress, and have run House caucuses all across the country. So very excited to be here today and very excited to answer questions. Just please don't make them too hard. So.
Awesome. Phil?
Yeah, thanks, Nicole. Thanks, Ken. Thanks, Jimmy. Great to be with you guys today. Thanks so much for putting this together. Very pleased to be on with you to talk about New Jersey and beyond, the Great Garden State. As Nicole mentioned, I am the vice president at Cold Spark. We're a full-service advertising and strategy firm based in Pittsburgh, but we've worked in all 50 states at this point, I think. We were pleased to be the lead consulting firm for Dave McCormick's U.S. Senate race win in 2024. We're involved in elections in New Jersey, Virginia, and beyond so far this year. Pleased to be a part of the Cold Spark team and pleased with the work that we do for our clients and helping those folks win. Personally, I'm here in South Jersey. I've worked on races in 20-something states at this point. Met Nicole in 2010 in Iowa, but more recently worked as an RPD for the RNC covering the entire Northeast. And then before that, I was the executive director of the New Jersey Republican Party. And so, here in my home state, I've got like a little bit of expertise.
Well, thank you guys. Thank you guys for joining us today. And now we'll just jump into the questions. As I mentioned, we had a record number of questions, so I want to make sure we get through all of those before we get to the Q&A portion at the end. Mara Moreland reached out to us and wanted to know, what do you guys think is more important, door knocking, phone calls, or meet and greets in the neighborhoods? Phil, can we start with you?
Yeah, look, what I always tell folks is that if you're doing just one of those things, you're probably wasting your money, right? The answer to that question is any and all of them, right? But really, what we try and do, what I try and do, what I think is probably the best prescription for most races is that there's no silver bullet for making sure a voter sees your message, right? We don't know for sure that voter A reads the mail. We don't know for sure that voter B reads their text messages, right? We don't know that voter C watches a lot of TV, right? And so to the maximum extent possible, and it's a budget question, but it's also a strategy question. You always want to make sure you've got message consistency across all mediums, right? And so you're really trying to do an omni-channel messaging operation and hit folks kind of everywhere they are at the same time with the same message so that in a given couple days, couple weeks, a voter has the opportunity to see your message in their text messages when they're scrolling Facebook, when they're scrolling Twitter, when they're watching Hulu, when they're watching the 5 o'clock news, when they're opening their mail through a telephone town hall, and so on and so forth. And so there's not one silver bullet. We don't know. It's not 100% that young voters will see your message on social media. That's not 100%, right? It's not 100% that old voters will see your message in the mail. And so to the maximum extent possible, we always try and do at least two, if not more, of those sort of messaging mediums.
It's great. Jimmy, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I think particularly when you're focused on state races and off your elections, it's all about filling buckets. So what I tell my clients is that you have a multi range of things that you can do, and it's all about filling those buckets and making sure that you're able to hit those buckets. And state races in particular, door knocking and those type of things are very important. But they're kind of a loss leader if you don't have phones and mail and text messaging and digital and a little bit of TV. We run some of the most competitive races here in the country. We have a delegate who's in a Biden plus 12 district. She won last time in a recount. It took an all above the approach, in particular when you're talking about direct targeting, making sure that you're blanketing those direct targeted voters so that they have an idea of what's going on. Kind of, before you hit the door is very important. We look at take rates, we look at message response rates. Kind of hitting those targeted voters before you hit them on the door makes a massive difference. It makes a massive difference. So it's really an all of the above strategy. That's why you hire good GCs like Phil and I to make sure that you're kind of hitting those budgets as they go. Particularly off of your elections, you also have to worry about not only talking to swing voters, but also making sure you're getting your low props out too, which I'm sure we'll have a large discussion about low prop voters here.
Yeah, absolutely. If I can just jump in, Phil mentioned telephone town halls. That was something that when you think about an off-year election means low turnout by definition. It also means that your candidates are likely less well-known. And so, even the most well-known candidates for delegate, state rep, state senate don't have the same kind of name ID as someone at the federal level is going to have. And so making the assumption that, your general election voters will come out is mistake number one. What both guys alluded to is that voter contact is a leaky bucket. We know that the longer, more personal, more interactive of a conversation you can have with a voter, the more impactful it is in terms of its persuasiveness and how long lasting it is. But the reality is, not everyone can get a door knock. They're not all home when you visit. You're not going to go through that neighborhood 5 times, and not everyone lives in a knockable area. And that's why the notion of layering multiple strategies on makes so much sense. I think about even in, when you think about things like digital mail and TV in elections like this, you may have a high prop voter and a low prop voter in the same household. You may have someone who is and is not in your targeted universe. So I don't know if that mail, I know that mail was delivered, but I don't know that it got to the right voter in the household. And so using each voter contact method as a way to plug a leak in the previous voter contact methods you've used is the surest way you've got to turn people out. And the best way to manage your budget is making sure that you're coordinating them in such a way that when someone says they're not going to vote for your candidate, or they've already voted, or the number is wrong, they don't live there anymore, all of those things. It's amazing how the basic blocking and tackling of politics can get lost. And so, your voter contact budget, though limited, is going to go further just by good, clean management of your data, so you're not contacting wrong people.
And if I could piggyback on Nicole, I think one of the things that we have to start doing as operatives, we work with a lot of incumbents in a lot of different states, from Georgia to Virginia to New Mexico, all over the place. And one of the things that has been very effective is making sure when you have electeds and you have your incumbents doing outreach during legislative times. Our election cycles are now turning into, basically, 18-month affairs pretty much. So, we found it very effective, doing town halls through Campaign HQ and those type of things to do legislative updates, or making sure those low prop voters know that you exist, talking about really red beat issues. And you can target those low prop voters and let them know, hey, I just voted on this gun, this law that was going to restrict gun access, or hey, I'll just voted for lower taxes. But kind of starting this stuff early, when you're talking about winning competitive races and you're talking about trying to get people out in the off year, you're going to get more bang for your buck during it early on in the election cycle. In that March and February, talking with their legislators and making sure if they have franking budgets or things like that, they can do it. It's been very effective. And Campaign HQ has the targeting and technology to make it so that your members can talk to the right people. And doing legislative updates is a big part of winning very competitive races.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Jimmy. And I think, to continue that conversation, Trump outperformed himself from 2020 in both New Jersey and Virginia. Candidates are obviously going to try to work to capitalize on that momentum. What signals will be the most important for, candidates to look out for, or for strategists to look out for in the state, depending on what levers they plan on pulling?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at that first, and then Phil, I'm sure I'm going to miss something, so you just follow it up. But I think ultimately, one of the things that we have to do in off-year races is we have to talk to those swing voters we know are going to show up. You've got to do a general election swing message when you're talking about really tough races, and then you've got to talk to those low prop voters. One of the things I think is really interesting, and I know New Jersey has the same phenomenon as Virginia, is you've got seats that maybe went 12 plus for Biden, but now only went 6 plus for Kamala Harris. So what is that delta, right? So clearly there was a 6 to 7 point delta in some of these sweet seats where they're moving, where they didn't like, where they like Biden, but then they didn't like Kamala. What is the issue set there? Why are they moving, right? And how are they moving? And I think that's really important when you start to go through it. I mean, the Trump campaign did a lot of very, very smart things, and one of the things that they found out, right off the bat, was some of the social issues were big indicators in certain communities. One of the seats that we have is the one we won by 50 votes, is a majority minority district. So targeting those areas and really understanding where you have to go is really important. In state races in particular, it's why although I've done the big stuff and been in some congressional offices and won NRC target race, one things I love about state seats is that you're able to really talk to everybody with a good budget in a meaningful way, and you can really knock out, kind of cut up those micro targets and really do it that way. So I just think, understanding you're in off-year elections, you've got to have a plan for swing voters, and you've got to have a plan for low prop voters, and you've got to have a plan to cut up your universe and hit those. And that's where text messaging and phone calls and mails really play a big part in cutting those universes up for a good solid reach point at a reasonable price.
So everything Jimmy said is 100% correct, right? Especially in states.
I'll send you that $20 later, Phil. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, you got my address.
Yeah.
And frankly, I don't have an incredible amount to add, but I'll hammer home something Jimmy said, which is that the low turnout environment creates like a specific set of problems for us to solve as campaigns. And one of the things that I think, one of the big picture things that we've seen over the last, I'll say 10 years, but basically since the 2016 election, is that the Republican Party is the party of low turnout voters, right? Remember in the '08 and 12 presidential campaigns, there was a lot of chatter from Democrats about how demographics are destiny. We need to turn out every single voter. We need to make sure everybody votes, which led them to participate in some of the illegal voter registration activities that they did and the loosening of voter ID laws. Their theory was that low turnout voters were Democrats, so just get everybody to vote and Democrats will win. And at the time, that may have been correct. It may not have been correct. But what we know is 100% true right now is that low propensity voters are more Republican than they are Democrat, right? We saw that in 2024. That's a large piece of why President Trump won. And we need to be cognizant of that as we go into the 2025 general elections, and then, of course, going into 2026. The persuasion piece of it is particularly interesting, right? I mean, in New Jersey, in North Jersey, we've got a congressional district, New Jersey 9, that is majority minority. The district is dominated by the city of Paterson, which I believe is over 75% non-white. And we won that congressional district. President Trump won that congressional district by under 1%, right? So a thin margin, but won that district. Our congressional candidate, unfortunately, wasn't strong enough to also win. But that's a district that, like, the proof is in the pudding, right? And we've already got the pudding. And so, the question is, how do we replicate the 2024 outcome by turning out a similar sort of matrix of voters in 2026, and then, of course, in sort of a different cut of the district in 2025, and it is that combination of persuasion and turnout that Jimmy was talking about. But to the point that Jimmy made, I mean, a lot of these non-traditional Republican voters are on our side on some of these social issues, right? They're flipping to us.
And I think it's important not to be scared about talking about them. And sometimes that's through a different PAC, or sometimes that's through a different entity. In Virginia, we have no laws here, so it's a little easier. But to piggyback on Phil, a lot of this is just, don't be afraid about leaning into some of those issues. And I think that's the one thing that the Trump campaign did. And I saw some of the ads up in, I was working on some races up in Delaware, so I saw a lot of the ads that you guys did for McCormick, and you guys did the same thing. They're great. But really leaning into some of those non-traditional issues and really targeting, don't be afraid to do that.
Yeah, and
100%.
issues, the issues that we're going to be looking at this fall are, state issues are fundamentally different than federal issues, and how we handle that is going to be important too. I think about, we did a campaign for a state leg caucus last year. They asked people, are you planning to vote for Trump or Harris? And we were calling center left people, trying to get them to split their ticket. And of the people who said they were voting for Harris, 40% said they'd be willing to vote for a Republican for the state house who cared about and would vote for school choice and teacher pay and some of these issues that Republicans have truly delivered on, that Democrats, after decades of saying they care about these things, really haven't. And so making sure that we split people properly, and that we pay really close attention to, I'd be looking at people who voted in 2024 in November in the general and did not vote in the 2022 general. And the percentage of those that we can hold and get to vote in elections in New Jersey and Virginia is going to tell you a lot about what we can expect in 2026.
Yeah, that's perfect. And thank you. That question came from Nolan and Dunnigan. And I know, Phil, if you just want to put a bow on this one before we move to the next question, I think there was one more point you're trying to make.
No, just that, Nicole's right. There is a substantial amount of voters, and the percentage varies, or the percentage will fluctuate based on the size of the electorate and the year that you're in, who are going to vote for Republicans on the state level and who are going to vote for Democrats on the federal level. Voters think about the elections differently, even like within the same year, right? 2018 in Iowa, right? Governor Reynolds won by in between 2 and 3%. We didn't fare well in the federal elections. There was no senator on the ballot, but if you totaled up the 4 congressional districts in Iowa, we lost the federal race statewide by almost 5%. but we won the state race. Same people, same human beings, by almost 3%. So what, something like 8% of people went into that ballot box and voted for a Democrat for Congress, but Governor Kim Reynolds to be governor. And so that's like a perfect encapsulation of what you're talking about, Nicole.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I mean, obviously, we're going to see how that plays out this time now too with Kim retiring. So, Nicole, do you see this cycle as a testing ground for some new voter contact, strategies ahead of the 2026 election, particularly in those traditional blue states that are blue areas that are becoming increasingly more purple? Are there any specific tactics or innovations that you're watching out for that could move the needle?
Yeah, I guess I can tell you about a couple of things that we're working on and we're doing, and then some things that I'm just seeing out there generally in terms of what we're doing. We've been seeing record high turnout on telephone town halls. This year, it has not been uncommon for 10 or 15% of a universe that you call to pick up the phone and listen, and they're listening to folks for 8, 10, 12 minutes. And just with the overall political climate in the country, people are really engaged and they really want to listen. And it gets a different group of people than the 10 activists who show up at an in-person town hall or a bus tour stop or something like that. And so that's, partly political climate, it's partly targeting, it's partly technology. There's no one, all three of those things come together to make for, an opportunity. And we've seen state ledge candidates talk to, up to 1,000 people at once. And, that's the largest audience they're ever going to speak with. So that's been something that perhaps 4 years ago we wouldn't have recommended, but we absolutely are recommending to people now. The other thing that we're seeing on a larger scale is, going back to 2018, we would send 2 or 3 text messages for state rep candidate, and we would call that a really aggressive plan. We are seeing folks send 20 plus text messages, and that means we're seeing opt-out rates that can be high. So if 25% of your universe opts out of seeing text messages, they're super cost effective. Over 90% of people will open them and see them. They're really effective. But unless you're gonna win by 25%, you're gonna miss people from the opt-outs, and making sure that you've got a strategy to catch those opt-outs through some other form of communication, whether it's a door knock, a live call, digital, some combination of all of those things. So those are the 2 things that we're seeing specifically. One is a caution to look out for, and one is something to take advantage of if it's not on your radar screen. The other things that we're seeing are, probably not a secret, but long form podcasting. The number of folks who get their news from something like that and are willing to listen to these long interviews from candidates. It's because in this age, people yearn for authenticity and they yearn for connection, because that's the thing that's missing. And that's why podcasting and listening to these podcasts has been so meaningful for candidates. And that does not only have to apply if you are Donald Trump going on Joe Rogan's show. So there are podcasts that are state-based, locally based, that you could be on, that you can have just a longer time to really show people who you are and what you're made of. And kind of what's in your soul. I think, to get people to want to vote for you, especially a low prop voter, if you can hit them right in their heart and make a connection with them, that's going to be more meaningful than a 30-second ad. So the other thing that we're seeing just in its nascent stage is relational organizing. When you think about it, you can ask ChatGPT for a good recommendation on a plumber in the Brooklyn, Iowa area, or you can ask your friends, which of those are you going to do, and which recommendations are you going to consider the most reliable. And so there's a couple apps out there that have been trying to perfect this, and I think that we are going to see that hockey stick of increase in organizing as it was originally intended. Let's have friends talk to friends, neighbors talk to neighbors, people in their circle of influence talk to who they influence. Did a campaign a few years ago. We had a really popular football coach that had endorsed our candidate. I'd call that a micro influencer. If you don't live in that town, or maybe in the towns nearby, that guy doesn't matter to you. But if you live in that town, that person really matters. And I think that gets to the core of who talks to you can have an outsized impact on the effect of that conversation.
No, but I think that's perfect. Anything to add, Jimmy or Phil?
Yeah, so I guess Nicole's right, that relational organizing is something that like we're seeing people talk about more, right? Obama in 2012 used a lot of that, but it hasn't really caught on our side. And I've long kind of wondered if that was like a tactical error that our team was making, or if it was a phenomenon of like a historically popular candidate in Barack Obama. But I think it's worth a go. I think it's something that can absolutely like change hearts and minds. There are a fair amount of academic studies that show that to the extent there is a silver bullet, a most effective contact method, it's person to person, and a rather known person to person, right? Not stranger to person. And so as we look for new ways to talk to folks, I think that makes a lot of sense. We're seeing a fair amount of like influencer marketing that's happening in the last like 12 months or so. Trump campaign used it effectively. I think we're going to find out in 2025 and 2026 if it works for people who aren't Donald Trump. But certainly that's something you're seeing people talk about. And then like one level up from like the very like specific tactical stuff, like the biggest sea change that we saw in 24 and that we've been pushing for a couple of years, of course, is pre-election day voting among Republicans, right? Vote by mail and earlier person voting. Virginia, perhaps no place where the impact was felt more. Obviously, Pennsylvania had a substantial amount of it last year. New Jersey, of course, were the Democrats in New Jersey are changing the laws around voting every 5 minutes, so we're adapting to that readily. But certainly, like the tactics and strategies that campaigns have that drive mid and low propensity Republicans to vote before election day are critical.
Yeah, and I'm going to get a question at some point about low prop Republicans, and I will spend 45 minutes talking about it because I'm a nerd with that stuff. But I think one of the things that we can see at the state level is, you know, I don't know a better way to say this, but the non-sexy part of campaigning, that's really the grinding, is going to be, making sure you're doing neighbor letters. Do you have a precinct where you have somebody who's really popular? Are you doing neighbor letters? I'm this person. I support this person. This is why. Are you following it up with text messages? You can do a lot of when you're trying to fight in the margins for votes. I'll talk a lot about Kim Taylor, who is a top target this year, and really kind of did some stuff that was pretty great in 2023 to get people out. But one of the things that we do is neighbor letters and neighbor texting and trying to localize things. And we had a black pastor that came out and supported her. So what did? We made sure everybody in his neighborhood understood why. And when you're fighting in the margins for these seats, I'm not talking R+10s. I'm talking D+6s and above. When you're fighting for these margins, having, I would call them third party validators that are important to areas is the difference between winning and losing by 15 votes. And I've lost elections by 2 votes, and I've won them by one in recounts. And when you're trying to fight for those margins and you're trying to just scratch for everything, doing some more of those neighbor letters, doing some more of those neighbor texting is really effective. And again, it's not fun, it's not glamorous, it's not the $1 million media buy you're making on a market, but it's the stuff that's gonna win those margins and win them in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think, last cycle, we definitely saw some missteps on our side of, people putting all their eggs in the basket of getting some really flashy commercials on TV in districts that they thought that they could easily win, right? And the truth of the matter is, having those commercials make you feel great. They look awesome. But if you don't get the voters out to vote, it's all for naught in the end, right? So,
and I think it's all balanced. I mean, I think you got to have some good commercials and you got to do face to cameras and you got to do those things. But particularly when you're talking about state and local seats where people are still mad about the stop sign that's not there, or the road that's been a pothole for 10 years, or when you're really talking about local issues, doing that extra step and doing kind of those very organized, very just kind of slogging along grassroots campaign where you go precinct by precinct and find those people that can come out. It really makes a difference. It's how I've won some of the close races.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Thanks for that question, Alejandro. We'll move on to our next one here. Phil, if we can start with you. Are there any unique pressure points or opportunities that you're seeing in either New Jersey or Virginia that might not exist in other battleground states?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I could probably talk about the intricacies of New Jersey elections until everybody quits Zoom here. But one of the things that we'll see a lot of in New Jersey is, we are geographically small but large by the amount of people we got, right? Most densely populated state in America. And as a result of that, we've got a lot of different types of voters, right? So, the state is kind of um, cut in half east-west by a road called 195, right? And you've got about about 60% of the population in the northern half of the state, and about 40% of the population in the southern half of the state. And they might, those two regions might as well be, different planets, right? The folks in North Jersey, the average voter in North Jersey is commuting into New York City. Their, college degree or graduate degree or higher. They're high income. They are living in a town with exorbitant property taxes. And they're impacted by, for example, what just happened today, right? Which is a breakdown in negotiations between New Jersey Transit and the union of engineers that work the trains. And so as of right now, New Jersey Transit, the vehicle that most people use to get into New York City, is dead. It's dead. No trains are running right now, right? And so in South Jersey, nobody really cares about that, right? Or people care, but it's not impacting their daily lives, right? South Jersey is more spread out. There's more agriculture, and folks do not commute into Philadelphia in the same way that people in North Jersey commute into New York City. And so there's the sort of like regional issues that I think make more of an impact in the odd year elections, in the state legislative and gubernatorial elections, than they do in the federal elections. And so certainly see that. And then, of course, in New Jersey, we're seeing a fair amount of the same stuff that folks are experiencing across the country, which is cost of living problems, but it's exacerbated in states like New Jersey, where we are, by some measures, the highest tax state in America, the highest cost of living state in America, and the government, the governor, the Democrats that control all of state government have made conscious choices to raise those prices. And so we are like kind of working on the micro issues that impact folks' daily lives, but also impacted by the macro issues in an extremely exorbitant way, based on like the sort of nature of the state.
That's awesome. Before we move on, Nicole, do you have anything to add?
Hey, Nicole, I can go if that's okay.
Yeah.
I so we're based in Richmond, Virginia. So, as a young operative, I was thrown into looking to work off year elections. And I always say off year elections are kind of like, I know this is crazy, but it took me a while to get through college, and I was a big fan of winter classes. I could cram those credits in, between, November and January, and get 3 credits, and it was great. So I accredit a lot of how I look at things working off the elections in Virginia, because as a young political operative, I was looking for work. I was able to find specials, and then helped run the House caucus in 15 and 17 here for Virginia. And one of the things that is so unique about the state, and New Jersey is probably the same way, is that we have elections pretty much every single year. So you're dealing with a very different sort of voter than, let's say, Kansas, or let's say Texas, because these are very intelligent voters. They vote every single year. There's an independent streak when how they vote. Virginia is also very much moved by the DC media market and what's happening in DC. So what's coming out of DC is very impactful, particularly in the northern part of the state. But the biggest opportunity this year for any operative coming in is going to be understanding that off-year elections are a very unique animal on how you deal with things. One of the biggest mistakes that I see is that you've got federal year voters, that don't vote in off-year elections. And any targeting I would tell you to do is you can juice turnout in a very efficient and very meaningful way by targeting those off-year elections. Issues are important, and is important, but targeting those on-year elections and getting them to vote in the off-year elections is how you win really tough seats. Because you can basically, if you can juice your turnout by 10%, get those Republicans out, you're taking maybe a D+6 and making them a toss up. So kind of really understanding that here in Virginia is really so important. When we do these type of long plans, I always say you've got to run two campaigns. You've got to run the campaign to swing voters to make sure that you're talking about general elections issues people care about, and then you got to run those campaigns to make sure that the federal election your voters are coming out. Which I think is going to be very interesting. Very interesting here is to kind of see the impact of having a Republican in the White House is always something, regardless who it is always something that we've always had to handle here in Virginia. The northern part of the state is very impacted by what's going on in DC. You've got Norfolk Media Market, which has got the heaviest portion of military and contractors in the country. And then you've got the Richmond market, which is kind of touching all of that into one. So Virginia is a really unique animal. What I can say is that it's allowed me to really go in and hone my ability to juice turnout. And a lot of the reasons why we've won the seats we've had as a company is that we're all bought in and making sure we're getting our low profit Republicans out to vote. And it makes it much easier because we know where to start. And those are on your election voters who don't work in off years. You just got to give them a reason to come out.
Yeah, and Jimmy makes a great point, and I think as it relates to this question specifically, Ken, I mean, you've got like the very local issues are great to send to high propensity swing voters who are highly educated, engaged on the issues. They're like looking around their town for problems to vote about, right? But low propensity voters are typically not like strongly considering the issues at hand in front of the legislature on in today's journal, right? They're not deeply researching policy questions in the way that 4 out of 4 swing voters might be. And so as we approach like turning out low propensity voters, we might think about a messaging campaign that might not be focused on these local issues, right? But a messaging campaign that might be focused on red meat issues and frankly like repetition and information. These voters that are these voters that are low information, they have no idea that there is an odd year election in most cases. They have no.
And you got to hit them, more than you think you do. I mean,
100%.
we can have a large conversation. We got a 45-day early voting window here in Virginia. So I'm very big about doing messaging arcs before we hit that early voting. I truly believe that we have to have our entire kind of campaign playbook out by July and August now to get in front of early voting. But the low prop voters aren't going to be like, hey, Youngkin wants you to come out and vote, you should go do it. Or, hey, Trump really wants to go out and vote. Like, they're not going to tune into that. They're going to be like, hey, if you don't show up, go out and vote, your guns are going to be taken away. If you're not going to go out and vote and you won't do it now, they're going to make sure your kids don't have school choice. Like, if you don't go out and do this now, they're going to take they're going to open the voter rolls. Like, it has to be an aggressive message to get these voters out. And Campaign HQ was instrumental in the win that we had in 2023 and will be instrumental in the win we're going to have in 25. But really targeting those voters and sending them aggressive messaging. You have to go out. One book that I recommend to everybody who comes work for us here at JLK Political is called Victory Lab. It's a book written by actually it was written by Democrats about Obama's win and how basically they were sending aggressive mail like, hey, you haven't voted, and your neighbors are going to know you haven't voted, and they're going to be very mad at you that you haven't voted. Now, some of that's not appropriate to send through the campaign, and that's where you got to get a little bit creative based on what's happening. But these are Republicans. They want to vote. They need to know to vote, and they have to have a reason to go vote. And kind of soft messaging on, hey, we need you to go do this is just, in my experience, not enough. I've got I've got a great guy that works for me who wrote some of our beginning texts that I sent to Campaign HQ. And they were, I was like, okay, that's a
They
10.
were hard
Let's take it
hitting,
down.
Jimmy,
Yeah,
hard hitting.
yeah, they were very hard hitting. They're like, if you don't go vote, your grandfather who fought World War II is gonna, they're gonna come out of his grave and beat you up. Like it's not like that, but they were pretty aggressive. We toned it down from like a 12 to 9, but they were still extremely aggressive. Do you want to sit at Thanksgiving on your table when your gun rights are taken away and explain to your family why you haven't voted? And it's got to be at that level to pull these voters out. And that's why you've got to find a certain entity to do it from. I don't recommend it coming from the campaign. In Virginia, we've got pretty loose election laws, so we're able to kind of move around some of that. But at the end of the day, these aren't your cupcake text messages. You have to go out and vote. If you don't go vote, your neighbors are going to know that you didn't vote. They're going to shame you next time they see you at the community pool because you didn't go vote. I mean, it's got to be hard hitting. I think that's the biggest, and I'm hijacking this question, but I apologize. But I think that's the biggest advice I'd give for low prop elections or special elections or off year elections or anything that's not on a date. If you think that you're hitting your text messages hard enough to get voters out, go back and then write it at 11, and then have your text vendors say, hey, Jimmy, let's take this down a little bit. But you've got to be pretty aggressive on how you're talking to these voters. Do they want to vote? They agree with everything we're doing. They're hardcore. They're Republicans. They're conservatives. But they got to have a reason to go do it. And I have found to get these voters out, you've got to hit them between 15 to 25 times in multiple formats: texting, digital, phone calls, pass-through calls, and live calls are a massive tool that we use that Campaign HQs offer that are great. Just smashing them to make sure they go out to vote. The good thing is now that we are able to track early voting the way that we are, you can pick your set budget, and as voters come out, you just put new ones in the pool. But it's a off-year election, and pulling those voters out are absolutely a must when you're talking about Virginia and New Jersey races and off years.
Yeah, and the aggressive and shocking is not the right word, but sort of like
I don't know. You should see some of my text messages, Bill.
Yeah,
Nicole could tell you some of them were pretty.
I found them
pretty
shocking.
Yeah, good.
Yeah.
It extends to the visuals too, right? So like the language and the visuals, right? So like we did mail in a congressional district where we were targeting like infrequent voters, trying to get them to vote early, and we portrayed the Democrat in like a visual and artistic theme evoking memories of the Soviet Union, right? And use that sort of like visual framework consistently over the course of like 6 months. And so pairing like an art style that breaks through and is for most voters evocative of like an extreme sort of political construct is helpful and it really, I think, amplifies like kind of the whatever the narrative that you're trying to push.
Yeah, and also don't be afraid of, like, we did some pretty aggressive stuff where we basically had like from a male perspective, like, these are your neighbors and they voted and you have, and people will be like, this is really probably beyond the pale, and sometimes it is, but you've got to do those type of things to get them out to vote. So don't be afraid.
Oh,
Go ahead.
The thing
No.
that I would add on that, though, is that's why it's so important that when you're doing social pressure, you have an outside organization doing it, and
Absolutely.
it should not have the candidate's disclaimer on it.
Absolutely. Because people will say they don't like it and they don't, but guess what?
Right,
They'll go vote.
right, exactly. And if, and then they'll go vote, we can take them off the list. But making sure, because people will have a negative reaction, it's important that it's not the candidate that does it. And we've seen that done well, but we've also seen it done poorly. And anyone we care about enough to be on this call, we don't want to see them do it poorly.
Yeah, and I'm happy to talk offline about that stuff. We were pretty we did worked with Campaign HQ and a couple other vendors and did some pretty aggressive above board stuff that was through different areas that allowed us to be a little bit more aggressive than I'd ever put on a campaign. You can put on your stuff, like you can send a text and say, hey, I know these are obnoxious. If you go vote, guess what? I'm not going to bother you anymore. We had our door knockers say, like, hey man, I know you're getting this stuff 5 times a day. The easiest way to fix that is just go vote. And by the time when you get 2 weeks out, they're going to be like, you know what, I'm just going to go vote. We had people at the polls coming up, telling our poll watchers, like, yeah, I saw, I got 7 text messages and 2 live calls and 3 mail pieces. I'm voting now. Can somebody please, here's like my address on a sticky note. Can you please take me off of this? I'm like, yeah, well, now you voted. We're more than happy to.
Yeah, I think that's that's a really good point. I always tell people, obviously I work in this space, and so my friends and family that don't, they always ask me like, how can I get taken off the list? It's like as soon as you vote, you're off. Like nobody, we've already captured what we need at that point. So, but thinking on, particularly on the messaging side of things, in the primary particularly, what are you guys finding that's effective for candidates to, separate themselves in their messaging, from, one Republican to the other?
I'll be quick on this. I think I am a big fan of telling stories. I'm a big fan of having candidates tell their personal stories when it relates to healthcare or relates to business, or relates to any type of issues. And when you talk about tough issues such as like, Northern Virginia, we got to deal with the federal government being cut. It's just something we have to do with the amount of federal workers and the amount of contractors. Having personal stories that allows you to tackle very tough issues. We had a candidate win in 23 in a year where there was basically an abortion referendum. She went face to camera, talked about women's reproductive rights, talked about that she was a single mom, loosened up the issue a little bit. But she did that through personal storytelling. And I think whenever you're in these crowded fields, like particularly in primaries, everyone's going to support Trump. Everybody's going to, support Doge. Everyone's going to support your Second Amendment rights, pro-life. Those are check boxes that people are going to do in every primary. But it's how you tell the story through your candidate and the personality. And when you talk about one thing that is like very different now than it was a decade ago, it's like a decade ago you have like 3 or 4 mediums that you could really tell things through, and broadcast is one of them, and you couldn't do that in a 30-second ad. But now with text messaging, and now with social, and now with some of these really affordable mediums, you can tell individual stories and get them to people in a way that's very quickly. Nicole said earlier about sending video ads via text messages. I mean, you can really do that type of stuff and get the people and have more long form conversations to make it so that your candidate's cutting through that noise. Because as we're going to see in the next 2 years, in every single primary, everyone's going to hit on those different things. But how are you connecting to the voter to an emotional level to take it to that further top? And I think that's what's most important.
Yeah, Jimmy's right on that. And like one level up from that is what I've seen in primaries so far across the country this year. It is almost in many ways like a who is the most pro-Trump contest, right? And so we see that in primaries that are occurring in early 2026, primaries that are occurring in less than a month here in New Jersey, and around the country, right? And so either coming around to being extraordinarily pro-Trump or establishing that you have been a pro-Trump guy or girl for your entire career, having the ability to tell that story, like where you are at on the president, if you've got kind of like, something in your history where you broke from President Trump, right? Can you talk about that in a way that makes sense to primary voters, right? Because as like a general matter, as a 30,000-foot kind of point, endorsements don't make that much of a difference in elections, except for a Trump endorsement in a Republican primary right now. And so making sure that you're in a position to be viewed as a pro-Trump candidate by the primary electorate is extraordinarily important politically right now. And being, like kind of like one step away from that, being like in league with where the president is at on these policy issues, right? So like, what did the president talk about in 2024 a lot? Broadly speaking, it was, ridding our society of these, woke idiots, right? Closing the border, being tough on immigration, removing some of these, kind of like wacky gender issues from our schools, right? So being able to talk intelligently and, to Jimmy's point, from like a personal place about these issues lends credibility to the candidate on those issues, and allows them to address any sort of like problems they might have on those issues in an effective way. Talking about the primaries that are occurring right now and will occur, sort of in the near future, I think those are kind of the top issues that are like on my radar.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say, each primary can be different, but there can be if you actually, if you and your primary opponent disagree on something that's important, and there's a way that you can, and there's a way that you can use that as a wedge, trying to target voters who are more likely to agree with your position than your candidate's position. I realize that is old school, but there are times that candidates are different. You get a candidate who's 70 years old and a candidate who's 25 years old. Well, all of a sudden, that's a pretty substantial difference between candidates. And so I even think about, I worked on a primary probably 8 or 10 years ago. My candidate was from one part of the district, the other candidate was from the other part of the district. These are low turnout elections. They didn't just try to increase turnout, they only increased turnout in the side of the district where people knew them and not in the other side of the district. So just going back to the real basics of politics, where do I differ with my primary opponent, and how can I maximize the turnout where I live, and minimize the turnout where my primary opponent lives. And when I say lives, I mean that could be issues, it can be demographic differences, it could be geographic differences.
I think those are all great points, and we have time for probably one or two more questions. So I want to try to make sure we get through some of the more impactful ones that we got, multiple people asked about. So Matthew Carpenter, along with a few other people, wanted to talk about voter registration and particularly using that to win the primary. Should a campaign be focused on persuading high prop voters in a primary, or registering and turning out new and low prop voters? I know, Jimmy, you got a lot of experience here.
Yeah, I would say I would not worry about that too much. I would worry about trying to talk to as many Republican voters as possible. Primaries in general are a fight for a subsection of a subsection of voters, and kind of take the money you're going to spend on doing voter registration and talk to more Republicans. Maybe those are medium prop voters. And at the end of the day, voter registration is a lot of money to do it right. I mean, it's not just about signing a voter up. It's about signing that voter up and then making sure that they actually get to the polls, which is a longer process. Now, look, I've had a lot of clients who, have a big congregation at their church, or is very popular, in some type of sporting thing, or is very, been volunteer at the library for years. And I think that there can be programs to make sure that those people go out and vote. But I would take the money you're thinking about spending that and talk to as many Republican voters as possible. And particularly in a Republican primary fight, the biggest indication of who's going to win is name ID and positive image flow. And those are the two most important things when you win a primary. How many people know you and how positive they think about you. So all your money's got to go, getting your name ID up and then making sure that it's positive as well. So that's just my thought on that.
Yeah, I think Jimmy's right. And I think it's almost like a prioritization of resources question, right? So like,
Right.
How are you going to spend your next dollar? Start with the people that are going to vote. Then before you would start registering new people, you would go down the ladder one step to people who you think are going to vote, but they're with you. Right. So turn those people out. And then if you and this is like, a touchy question, but it's like if your polling shows that you're losing and there's not enough potential votes for you among people who are currently registered to vote, not only are you in a bad spot, but you also then need to register new people to vote, right? And so,
or just burn it down and go negative. But that's another burn it down, baby. That's another discussion. But there is also that option. Yeah, to just send the torpedoes and let it go, right?
100%. Yeah. But like if you're in a state where like there's like a ton of conservative independents who wouldn't vote in a Republican primary, but they're registered to vote, and you think that those people are like your voters for whatever reason, that either through polling or whatever, like try and get those people to register as Republicans, right? But I would always like start with the folks that are definitely going to vote, and then the folks that are already Republicans don't need to take an additional like registration action, and then move on to voter reg type stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree with what Jimmy and Phil said. The only thing I would add there is to know the level of transience in your district, how many people have moved in since the last election. I think that might be the only area where I would target if I could know that someone was registered as a Republican where they previously lived. But it depends on where you live as to whether or not there's enough inflow of people into your district for that to be meaningful in any way. But like Phil said specifically, the voter that you have to register is going to be the most expensive vote that you can get. And if you can spend that dollar, shoring up 2, 3, 4 votes, you're better off there.
I think that's great context. Thank you, guys. Our last question goes to Anne Marie Hauser. This probably we'll let Phil answer this one first since he's a New Jersey resident. But with Trump's popularity in New Jersey and really with the last poll with Emerson, what kind of difference is that going to make on the ground for these down ballot races? And then obviously the jailing of the Newark mayor, is that going to be helpful as well?
So President Trump lost New Jersey in 2020 by like 16 points, and then lost it in 2024 by just under 6 points. So like a 10-point improvement in one presidential cycle is astronomical, right? And right after Election Day, there was some sort of discussion about how the improved results for the president in the greater New York City area, including New Jersey, was the result of like Dem turnout drop off. But like as more and more mail ballots were counted, that became less and less true. But it's a huge factor in New Jersey, right? And so, every single ad in the 2021 gubernatorial election that the Democrats ran was trying to paint our 2021 nominee as Jack Ciattarelli as Donald Trump, in New Jersey, right? And so I don't think they're going to do that this time around because the president did so much better. And what our nominee needs to do in 2025 is, of course, get the Trump folks and then get a small but real amount of people who voted for Kamala Harris in the presidential race to vote for themselves in the 2025 general election. And it's eminently doable because in 2021, our 2021 gubernatorial nominee Ciattarelli lost by 3 right after Trump was losing by 16, right? So outperformed Trump by about 13 points. If our nominee outperforms Trump by 13 points in 2025, we're going to win in a landslide. And so, I'm not predicting that, but certainly, we can dare to dream. So the improvement in President Trump's popularity will not only change like sort of the issue matrix that we're talking about for the final few months of this campaign, but just like, a rising tide lifts all ships, right? The Republican brand is better as a result of President Trump's actions last cycle. And then on the Newark mayor getting arrested, I think that's more of an impact on the Dem primary. The Dem primary is a mess. There's like 100 candidates running. The establishment lane is fractured. The progressive lane is fractured. It's a bit of a mess to kind of sort it all out, and they're killing themselves on it, and probably to our benefit or the Republican benefit in the general election. But if anything, I think it just continues to hammer home the point that President Trump and Republicans made in 2024 that the Democrat Party is absolutely out of control. They've lost their minds. And we've seen in the last, 5 months here, like as President Trump's popularity has, sort of fluctuated, like the Dem popularity stays mired in like the low 20s, which is catastrophic. It is the albatross around their neck going into the 2025 elections. And whether it's New Jersey, Virginia, or beyond, that'll be a factor in the general election.
I think that's great insight. Do you see any how that's playing out for Virginia, Jimmy?
Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately the way that Democrats are hitting us now is, and I've seen this now. I mean, they started running ads in our competitive district in March of this year, so we've been already taking incoming fire from the Dems on their side, and they're just being much more cautious on how they're hitting Trump. In fact, really, they're focusing more on the cuts and Elon Musk And, 21, it was very nasty personal stuff toward Trump. Now they're really not doing that. And I think that's because, I mean, A, he's made a Teflon, but B, it just doesn't work. I mean, people forget Trump has now, been in some sort of public political spotlight for over a decade. So I think you're going to see the Dems really try to focus more on issues. Like in 21, when we were sitting here, and I was really proud our firm, basically between two of our candidates took back the majority for Republicans in 21. We're very excited about that. But the vitriol from the Democrats on the personal side with Republicans was at an all-time high. I think you're going to see that change a little bit. I think they're going to really start focusing on issues, which is a different tack for them, and I'll be interested to see how they go, because I just as Republicans, we win issues all the time. That's what we're most good to do. I also think a lot of this is going to be based out on turnout. Where's the base? Are they happy where things are now? Do they feel like they have to go out and continue their vote? Are we going to have the resources here to make sure that they do go vote? And I'll be really interested to see kind of where base turnout is. I mean, the one thing that's really interesting in a lot of the districts that we're running this year in Virginia is that you've got, Trump improving margins, particularly in some of these outlying rural seats, by large numbers. And I really think it comes to, and I know enough about New Jersey to be dangerous, but I think it comes through a lot of just, where are these rural voters going to be? Do they feel like they still need to show up? We're going to have the resources to tell them to show up, because I think a lot of the issues that Trump is focused on are 80-20 issues. I think the great thing that they have, that the campaign did in 2024, is really focused on these like no-brainer 21 issues, 80-20 issues. Like, we should be treated fairly. It should stay here in America. We shouldn't have, dudes playing women's sports. Like, those are pretty 80-20 issues. I think everybody agrees with that. And really, what I'll be interested to see is, where's the base? Are they going to show up? And are we still making the gains that we did in the suburbs? There's a lot of places from working class areas that we really did well in. And does that, the coalition that Trump cobbled together, do they stay with us? If they stay with us, we'll have a better off year than we think we will.
Perfect. I think that's a great point. Thank you so much. First of all, to our panelists, Nicole, Phil, and Jimmy, for joining us today. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions beforehand. I apologize if we didn't get through all of them. If you want to get an answer to those, feel free to email myself or Nicole. We'll connect with Phil and Jimmy to get you what their responses would be. And thank you for everyone for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of your Friday and a great weekend. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.